I wanted to get into transcendental arguments because that's a hobby horse of mine. I love those. And Putnam I don't think he calls it a transcendental argument, but he uses the same language of, preconditions or necessary preconditions. He says, maybe he calls it a transcendental deduction or something, but it's really close. And I just wanted to see, what do you make of that? Do you think that Putnam's argument, even if it's not successful, is at least in the form of a transcendental argument?
Certainly the version that you gave earlier sounds like it's in the form of a transcendental argument. If you think of a transcendental argument as an argument that talks about using the Kantian language, a condition for the possibility of some kind of phenomenon or some kind of state of affairs, it looks like it has that structure. The version you gave actually does have that structure, because remember, the version you gave, it was supposed to show you that whether or not you're a brain in a vat, you can't truly think a thought with the sentence, I am a brain in a vat.
Right.
That looks like it's a kind of argument that shows you that a condition for being able to truly think the thought with the sentence, I am a brain in a vat, is that you are not a brain in a vat.
Yeah.
And so that looks like it has the structure of a transcendental argument. I always get worried. I mean, I'm glad you actually like them. I've always worried about transcendental arguments. They both strike me as intriguing and also fishy. So if you can have a category of the intriguing and fishy, that's what transcendental arguments have for me.
Definitely.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a great quote about that. It's like oh man, I forgot it. It's definitely, a lot of people think they're fishy, if not, but also intriguing, because if you can make one work, it's fascinating. It's like, what must our reason tell us? You kept on going like this, and I think you're using quotations, and that's what they're. Some of the authors have pitched the argument as disquotational. So our language disquotes, and so because our language disquotes, we can't be a brain in a vat, because there's Vatnese or Vat English does not disquote. This one, when people show me this, it really freaks me out. It makes me just think the argument collapsed, because it does seem like circular reasoning to say, look, my language, when I talk about being a brain in a vat, my language disquotes, and if I were in a vat, it wouldn't. But what do you make of that? Because it does seem to me like it might be viciously circular there.
I don't know whether it's true that if I were a brain in the vat, my language wouldn't disquote. What is true is if I were a brain in a vat, my language wouldn't disquote into standard English.
Mm-hmm.
So what I worry about in these kinds of cases, and here I'm going back to thoughts that I've had 20 years ago, Parker, so I apologize if I'm a bit fuzzy, but I remember coming to the conclusion about 20 years ago that the proper upshot of the worries about disquotation was, if you move between languages, disquotation can be a problem. But when the very language that is the target is also the language that is the meta language,
Mm-hmm.
The meta language is an enriched version of the target language, then I don't see any problem with disquotation. So that's the way I would put it. It's only when you're moving between languages, where the meta language is not merely an enriched version of the object language, that you have problems.
Okay, that's helpful. There's this problem of recent envatment that Putnam himself talks about. I think Davidson talks about. It's like, if this argument works, then no, you haven't always been a brain in a vat. But there's this problem of, maybe yesterday an evil scientist scooped out my brain and put it in a vat, and now I don't have the same problems, because my language might be able to disquote, and the reference of my concepts, brain in a vat, still refer to real brains and real vats that I have a causal history with for the last 29 years of my life. What do you make of that? Do you think that's a problem as well? Do you think that one is harder to solve than just the always been a brain in a vat?
Absolutely, yes. It was a really nice insight. I don't know who was the first person to have that insight, but it's a really nice insight that, at best, Putnam's argument against the possibility of brains in vats rules out a very, very, very strong version of the brain in the vat hypothesis, that I am and have always been a brain in a vat. It does not rule out the idea that you were just invaded by an evil demon. So I think absolutely that problem requires a different solution, and is not solved by the Putnamian reflections on the determinants of our word meanings or our thought contents.
Okay. Do you have any kind of, this is super speculative, but do you have any kind of idea or speculation about how long until your concepts would like acclimate inside the vat such that they would then start referring to vat stuff and then you could use the argument?
It's a marvelous question. You call it speculative, but that's speculative in the sense in which philosophy in general is speculative. I did have in the period when I was still working intensively on this topic, I remember giving this one some thought. And I remember thinking, well, let me be candid. I remember thinking how hard that question was. Certainly, you need enough time so that the best sense that we can make of your behavior and of your thinking requires attributing to you the concept that picks out the stuff that's in your current environment. Let me just give you one sense of how we might try to make these, how we might try to address that. Imagine, for example, go back to Earth and Twin Earth. Imagine that you're just transported to Twin Earth and you say that stuff there is water. Most people think, and certainly Putnam 1976 thought, that when you say that for the first time, you've said something false because you've said of stuff that is XYZ, that it's H2O. So you've said something false. But then a number of people pointed out, well, if you spend enough time on Twin Earth, presumably the word quote unquote water begins to refer to XYZ. How long does it take? Well, think about it this way. You will start thinking about the stuff in the lakes by and the rivers by you, and you will start forming beliefs and desires regarding that stuff. So presumably to capture those beliefs and those desires, we're going to want to talk about your notion that the concept that corresponds to water as picking out that stuff. So it looks like as soon as you can form desires and beliefs regarding that particular stuff, it looks like you want to be able to say that your term water now has a new concept. The trouble is that thought seems inconsistent with our original thought, which is when you first go to
Twin Earth,
Twin Earth, you think a false thought. So the only conclusion I came to here was if, to the extent that you can think de re of something, that is of the object itself, and think of it and describe it as water, and you're thinking, and water is crucial to your understanding of it, that's going to be an important indication that maybe you have a new concept. And my thought was when you first go to Twin Earth, it's not crucial to your picking out that stuff that you think of it as water. You're just attributing a property, the property of being water, to that stuff. But later on, you might want to think of that stuff as you're thinking of that stuff. You're thinking of it as water. At that point, it may well be you've spent enough time on Twin Earth, so now we have to attribute to you the new concept. But this is all very, very, very complicated, and I confess I never saw my way to clarity on that issue.